Thank you, Madam President. During his campaign, President Trump made a lot of big promises to workers in Ohio and across the country. He told them he'd look out for them. In a letter I sent to the president 2 days after the election, on November 10th or 11th, asking the president to work with me to renegotiate NAFTA, insisting on Buy America provisions and infrastructure. The president scrawled across the top of the letter, "I will never let down workers." He said he'd look out for them, but too often the people he's put in charge are along the lines of this latest nominee to the National Labor Relations Board, Marvin Kaplan. Mr. Kaplan has devoted his career, imagine such a thing, devoted his career to working to strip workers of their rights and trying to undermine the workers' watchdog he's now seeking to join. I never question people's motives in this body. I don't just quite understand why somebody would devote his work life to trying to take away worker rights and undermine labor protections. Someone who views unions and collective bargaining as a threat to be dealt with rather than essential rights to be protected has no business serving on the National Relations Board. The National Labor Relations Board was created in part at this desk. Then Senator Hugo Black of Alabama in the early 1930s sat at this desk. At this desk, one of the things he did was write the minimum wage law. One of the other things he did was work with Senator Wagner on the National Labor Relations Act. In those days, people understood. You created the National Labor Relations Act to strengthen workers, to create workers' rights and protect those worker rights. Mr. Kaplan's nomination sets that on its head. It's the latest in a long, long line of evidence that we simply in this country don't value work the way that we used to. Workers have continually seen their rights undermined. Workers' wages have been stagnant. People who work hard and play by the rules don't have the standard of living they had in our parents, even half a generation ago. We see companies refusing to pay overtime. We see to workers who have earned it. We see companies in far too many cases misclassifying workers so companies can pay them less. We see executive salaries in CEO compensation going up and up and up, yet for the broad middle class in this country, for people who aspire to be middle class, for low-wage workers, they've simply not got a raise for much of the last 20 years. So then we're going to appoint somebody to the National Labor Relations Board. The president appoints, we're going to confirm somebody to the National Labor Relations Board who's devoted his entire career to undermining workers, to taking away worker rights, to scale back worker protections, to depress wages, all of those things that we as a country never stood for. I don't know what's happening in this country that we think it's right to deprive workers of their wages, to take away overtime, to basically hit workers day after day after day in their pocketbooks while productivity goes up, while profits go up, while executive compensation goes up. When I was a kid, the average CEO to worker ratio of pay was about 30 or 35 to 1, or maybe even less than that. Today, it's often 300 to 400 to 1. The CEO will make 300 times what the average worker at the same company makes. How much is enough? What moral principle says pay a CEO 300 or 400 times what a worker makes? How much do they need? Why do they keep doing that? Well, they keep doing that in part because of people like Mr. Kaplan, who always sides with the CEOs against the workers. As we think about this, I think everybody in this body could learn something from Pope Francis. At the end of June, Pope Francis spoke to workers in Italy, to the Confederation of Trade Unions. He talked about something we don't think about much in this town that really ought to be at the heart of everything we do. He talked about the value and the dignity of work. A CEO can't say that and it's usually a he, that he values work when he takes away worker rights. He can't say that he appreciates the dignity of work when he scales back their wages or cheats them out of their overtime or takes away by misclassification the dollars that she has earned. When Pope Francis talked about the dignity and value of work, he meant all work. Whether you punch, and he meant looking out for the little guy, whether she punches a time clock or fills out a timesheet or makes salaries or earns tips, whether she is a contract worker or a temporary worker, whether he works in a call center or a bank or in a factory floor. I went to my high school reunion in Mansfield, Ohio, about a year and a half ago. I sat across from a bank teller who works for one of the largest banks in the United States. She's worked at that bank 30 years. She makes $30,000 a year, and she's worked at a bank as a bank teller for most of the last 30 years. That's not respecting the dignity of work. That's simply undermining the value of work. Pope Francis said, a person thrives in work. Labor is the most common form of cooperation that humanity has generated in its history. Work is a form of civil love that makes the world live and carry on. Yet too often that work, the cooperation that gives life purpose and that powers our country, doesn't pay off for the people doing it. Corporate profits are up, GDP is up, executive salaries have exploded upwards, but wages have barely budged. Workers simply haven't shared in the wealth they create. I went to an auto plant once after the passage of the North American Free Trade Agreement. At my own expense, I flew to Texas. I was representing a congressional district in Northeast Ohio then. And I went across the border, rented a car with a friend, went across the border into Mexico. And I visited an auto plant in Mexico. In this auto plant, it was an American company, but it was in Mexico. This auto plant looked just like an American auto plant. It was clean, it was up to date. In fact, it was newer than most of our auto plants. The floors were clean, the workers were working hard, the technology was up to date. But you know the difference between the American auto plant and the Mexican auto plant? The Mexican auto plant didn't have a parking lot because the workers didn't make enough. They weren't paid enough by this American auto company. They weren't paid enough in Mexico to buy the cars they make. Work wasn't respected, profits were going up, GDP was going up, executive salaries gone up, workers weren't sharing in the wealth they created. This is a universal problem. It affects blue-collar workers, it affects white-collar workers. It's in the industrial heartland of Ohio, it's in farmlands of Iowa, it's a problem on both coasts. People earn less, people can't save for retirement, people feel less stable, all while working harder, all while producing more for their employer, which feeds right into huge executive compensation, but they don't share in the wealth they create for their companies. They're less likely to have a union card to protect them. So the president's appointment to the National Labor Relations Board is pretty much a guy that has tried to make sure that unions don't get a foothold in our economy and in our companies. The Pope spoke about the labor movement. He said, it performs an essential role for the common good. It gives voice to those who have none. It unmasks the powerful. This is the Pope speaking. It unmasks the powerful who trample on the rights of the most vulnerable workers, defends the cause of the foreigner, the least, the discarded. This is the Pope talking. Think about airline baggage handlers. Airline baggage handlers used to make a good union wage. Because airline after airline has outsourced. They used to work for United, they used to work for American, they used to work for Delta. Now they work for private companies contracted with by United, American, and Delta. Their wages, baggage handlers' wages in the last 10 years have dropped 40%. They're working just as hard, they're probably working harder, but they're making 40% less than they used to. Again, the Pope said, unmask the powerful who trample on the rights of the most vulnerable workers, defends the cause of the foreigner, the least, the discarded. Pope said the capitalism of our time does not understand the value of the trade union because it has forgotten the social nature of the economy. This is one of its greatest sins. We know from right-wing attacks on the labor movement, from so-called right-to-work bills, to Mr. Kaplan's efforts to undercut rules protecting workers, that too many in this country don't understand the value of a trade union. Right now in Mississippi, auto workers at Nissan are organizing and trying to form a union. The corporation has responded, this foreign corporation has responded with despicable intimidation tactics. This is one of the most powerful Profitable countries in the world attacking workers one at a time in Mississippi. One worker said, there's no atmosphere of free choice in the Canton plant, Canton, Mississippi, just fear, which is what Nissan intends. It's shameful the lengths this corporation goes to, all to prevent workers from bargaining for fair pay. It's why we need a strong, not an undercut, weakened, emasculated National Labor Relations Board. We need a strong National Labor Relations Board to defend these workers and defend our laws in the books. Because an attack on unions is an attack on all workers, and it's an attack on our economy as a whole, because it depresses wages. We know the economy doesn't, this whole idea you give tax cuts to the richest people in the country, you make sure executive salaries are 5 and 10 and 15 million, you squeeze workers so they don't get increases. Is that true? That's a good economy? No. The money doesn't trickle down and build the economy. You build the economy from the middle out. We know that. In the 1990s, we built the economy from the middle out, 22 million private sector jobs during the Clinton years. The Bush years, where they did 2 huge tax cuts for the rich, under the theory, the Wall Street Journal theory, that will trickle down and everybody will be better. There was literally no net private sector job increase in the Bush years. 22 million jobs, private sector jobs in the Clinton years, 0 net growth in the Bush years. That's because in the Bush years, they believe the economy's built from the top down. It's not large businesses who drive the economy, it's workers. That's how you grow the economy from middle class out. If work isn't valued, Americans can't earn their way to a better life for their families, no matter how hard they work. That's what I think of when I hear Pope Francis talk about the social nature of our economy. Work has to support families and communities. Businesses seem today to be more focused on cutting costs than investing in their workforce. Workers are often nothing more than a line item in a budget, a cost to be minimized. More businesses use temp workers, more businesses use contractors. Look at the airlines. More businesses use subcontractors. They pay lower wage, they provide less job security, they roll back their retirement benefits, they undercut their health benefits, they take away legal protections. We have to change this. This spring, I laid out a plan to make work pay off by raising wages and benefits, including retirement, giving workers more say, more power in the workplace, encouraging companies to invest in their greatest asset, the American worker. My plan to restore the value of work has to include the labor movement. Modernizing labor law means recognizing the right of all workers, even those in alternative work arrangements, to collectively bargain for higher pay and better wages. Pope Francis concluded, there is no good society without a good union. There is no good union that is not reborn every day in the peripheries, that does not transform the discarded stones of the economy into its cornerstones. We're a country of discarded stones, of people who rose from humble beginnings, joined together to build institutions greater than any one of us. We need laws that reflect that reflect the dignity of work, that reflect the dignity of every, Pope's words, every discarded stone, of each and every American working too many hours for too little pay. The last thing we need for the National Labor Relations Board is another nominee who doesn't value work, who demeans work, demeans the workers and the unions who do it. Everyone in this town ought to listen a little more to Pope Francis and a little less to corporate lobbyists, a little less to big banks, a little less to Wall Street. Maybe then we start to make hard work pay off again for American workers. We start today by rejecting this anti-worker nominee. President, I yield the floor.